The sound of the vase shattering against the hardwood floor was the first thing that jolted me out of my thoughts. My hands froze mid-motion, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. Rebecca never dropped anything, she was meticulous to the point of obsession. But when I turned around, it wasn't the vase that caught my attention. It was her face. She stood there, barefoot in the shards, her lips curled into a smirk that didn't belong to the woman I'd spent 2 decades of my life with. She didn't flinch, didn't move to pick up the mess. Instead, she held my gaze with an unsettling calm, her eyes glittering with something dark. "I never liked that thing," she said, her voice low, almost amused. "Rebecca," I started, still trying to grasp the situation, "what's going on?" She stepped over the broken pieces with deliberate care, almost as if she were walking on air. "You really want to know?" she asked, her tone dripping with mockery. It wasn't just the vase. The air in the room was different, heavy with an unspoken tension that pressed against my chest. This wasn't a normal argument. This was something else entirely. "I don't have time for games," I snapped, my patience fraying. "What the hell are you doing?" She paused, tilting her head as if considering whether I was worth the effort. Then, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Without a word, she tossed it onto the counter between us. "Read it," she said, her smirk widening. My fingers hesitated before picking it up. It was heavier than it should have been, like it carried a weight beyond the paper itself. Unfolding it, I quickly scanned the contents, my heart sinking with each line. It wasn't just a document, it was a divorce agreement. Signed. Dated. By her. Weeks ago. What the? The words stuck in my throat. "Rebecca, what is this?" "It's what you deserve," she said simply, leaning back against the fridge with an air of triumph. "You didn't think I'd stick around forever, did you?" My mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. We had our issues, sure, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. Or so I thought. "Deserve?" I repeated, my voice rising. "After everything I've done for you? For us?" Her laugh was cold, sharp, like glass scraping against steel. "Oh, Alex. Don't be so dramatic. You've done your part. You were useful." The word hit me like a slap. Useful. I clenched the paper in my hand, the edges biting into my palm. "What are you talking about? You were never the prize, Alex. You were the stepping stone," she said, each syllable slow and deliberate, like she wanted to savor my reaction. "I used you. For stability, for a roof over my head, she gestured vaguely around the kitchen, "all of this. And now, I'm done." I stared at her, trying to find even a flicker of remorse or hesitation in her expression. There was none. Only that smirk, that godforsaken smirk, as if she'd been waiting years to deliver this blow. "Why now?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "Why do this now?" "Because I can," she replied, her tone maddeningly casual. "Because I'm finally free. And because you needed to hear it from me." She stepped closer, close enough for me to see the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. "You're pathetic, Alex. Always have been." The air left my lungs in a rush. I wanted to yell, to throw something, to wipe that look off her face, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her words, the venom in her voice. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was annihilation. And then, as if the situation couldn't get any worse, she dropped the final bombshell. "Oh, and just so you know," she said, her tone almost sing-song now, "I've been seeing someone else. For years. He's everything you're not." My hands gripped the counter to keep from shaking. My vision blurred, rage and disbelief fighting for control. But through the haze, one thought rose to the surface: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The house felt suffocating after she left, her perfume lingering in the air like a mocking reminder of everything she'd just said. My fists were clenched so tight my knuckles turned white, and I was still staring at the divorce agreement, crumpled now in my hand. She had walked out the door without a care in the world, leaving me in a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and humiliation. The audacity. 20 years. 20 years of my life I'd poured into this marriage, and she had the gall to treat me like a placeholder. My phone buzzed on the counter, jolting me out of my spiraling thoughts. I grabbed it, half hoping it was Rebecca with some pathetic excuse, some attempt to smooth things over. But no. It was a text, from her. Check the safe in the closet. You'll need what's inside. Trust me. The words sent a shiver down my spine. What the hell was this supposed to mean? A part of me wanted to ignore it, to throw my phone against the wall and never look at her messages again. But curiosity, and anger, won out. I stormed upstairs to our bedroom, the place we'd once shared. The walk-in closet felt colder somehow, emptier, though everything still looked the same. Her clothes hung neatly on their side, the same as always. For a moment, I considered ripping them off the hangers, but I focused on the safe instead. The combination came to me without thinking, my fingers moving on autopilot. When the door clicked open, I hesitated. I wasn't sure what I expected, a confession. A letter? Something that might explain her cruelty. But inside, there was only an envelope. Thick. Heavy. I tore it open, and what spilled out made my blood run cold. Photographs. Dozens of them. Some old, some recent. Rebecca with another man, her arms draped around his neck, her lips pressed to his, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. But that wasn't all. There were receipts too, hotel stays, dinners, even jewelry purchases I'd never seen. I flipped through them, each one a slap in the face. My stomach churned as I realized the timeline. She'd been seeing him for years. Years. All while coming home to me, acting like everything was fine. At the bottom of the stack, there was one final photo. This one was different. It wasn't just her and the man. There were others, people I didn't recognize. A group photo, taken at some lavish party I'd never heard about. Rebecca stood in the center, holding a champagne glass, laughing like she belonged. The man beside her wasn't just anyone. He was someone I recognized from the news. A high-profile CEO. Powerful. Wealthy. And Rebecca? She wasn't just his fling. She was arm candy. She was climbing. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. She wasn't just leaving me for someone else, she was leveling up. This wasn't about love or even lust. It was about ambition. I'd been nothing more than a rung on her ladder, a safety net while she aimed for something bigger. My phone buzzed again. Another text from her. By the way, don't try anything stupid. You're out of your league, Alex. Just sign the papers and move on. It's better for both of us. I stared at the screen, my anger boiling over. She thought she had won. She thought she'd humiliated me, crushed me, left me in the dirt. But she was wrong. So wrong. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but one thing was clear, this wasn't over. If she thought I was just going to roll over and let her rewrite the narrative, she didn't know me as well as she thought. I'd spent 20 years building her up, making her life comfortable. Now, it was time to tear it all down. The first few days after Rebecca's betrayal were a blur of rage and humiliation. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight, and every time I closed my eyes, her smirk haunted me. But anger has a way of sharpening focus, and by the third day, my emotions turned into something colder, more calculated. I started with the photos. Sitting at my desk, I spread them out like pieces of a puzzle. Who was this man she was seeing? What were they planning together? The group photo, with Rebecca standing among a crowd of elite-looking individuals, held the key. The man beside her, the CEO, was someone I vaguely remembered from a news article about a corporate scandal years ago. His name was Victor Hale. A billionaire known for playing dirty and leaving ruin in his wake. The receipts told a deeper story. Rebecca wasn't just his lover, she was involved in something larger. Some of the expenses were tied to high-end events, private clubs, and even international travel. This wasn't a casual affair. She had been moving in circles I didn't even know existed. I spent hours researching Victor Hale, digging through online forums, articles, and anything that could give me insight into who he was. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became, Rebecca hadn't just left me for a richer man. She'd stepped into a world of secrets, power plays, and manipulation. Then, I stumbled across something unexpected. One of the receipts was for a payment to a private investigator. My stomach churned as I connected the dots. She hadn't just been planning her exit, she'd been investigating me. But why? What could she possibly need to know about me after 20 years of marriage? Unless she was looking for leverage. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Rebecca wasn't just trying to leave me behind, she was trying to destroy me in the process. Whatever Victor Hale had promised her, she was all in, and I was the collateral damage. I needed to act fast. If she'd been digging into my life, there was no telling what she might have found or planned to use against me. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called an old friend, Ethan. Ethan and I had gone to college together, and while we'd taken very different paths in life, he owed me a favor. He worked in cybersecurity, and if anyone could help me figure out what Rebecca was up to, it was him. "Alex," Ethan said when I explained the situation over the phone, "you're telling me your wife is running around with Victor Hale and might have hired a PI to dig into your life? Jesus, man. You're in deep. Can you help me or not?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. There was a pause, then a resigned sigh. "Send me whatever you've got, photos, receipts, anything. I'll see what I can do." By the end of the day, I'd sent Ethan everything. While I waited for his response, I started putting my own plan into motion. If Rebecca thought she could humiliate me and get away with it, she had no idea who she was dealing with. The first step was simple, I stopped reacting. When she texted me, another smug message reminding me to sign the divorce papers, I ignored it. When she called, I let it ring. She wanted a fight, wanted to see me crumble, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I focused on gathering information. Ethan came through faster than I expected. 2 days later, he called me back, his tone urgent. "Alex, you're not going to like this," he said. "That PI. They weren't just looking into you. They were looking into your business. Bank accounts, contracts, even your partnerships. It's like she was trying to find a weak spot." "What the hell?" I muttered, my blood boiling. Why would she care about my business? "That's the part one don't get," Ethan admitted. "But listen, whatever she's planning, you need to stay one step ahead. She's playing dirty, and if Victor Hale is involved, this isn't just about money. It's about power." The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture wasn't clear yet. One thing was certain, Rebecca and Victor hadn't just underestimated me. They'd underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. The war began quietly. No shouting, no grand confrontations, just me, a man stripped of everything, methodically preparing to take back control. Rebecca's arrogance was her weakness, and I knew I could use it against her. She thought she'd crushed me, but she'd only given me clarity. Ethan continued feeding me information, and what he uncovered painted a damning picture. Rebecca and Victor weren't just entangled in an affair, they were tied to a massive land development deal Victor was spearheading. It wasn't in the news yet, likely because it was being done off the books, but Rebecca's name appeared on several contracts as a co-signer. She'd been using my assets, leveraging our shared resources to gain her foothold in his world. She was gambling with everything I'd worked for. The more I learned, the clearer it became that this wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. And she thought I'd sit back and let it happen. But there was a twist I hadn't expected. Ethan found something buried deep in Victor's financial records, a series of payouts to shell companies that had been flagged for fraud. Apparently, Victor wasn't as untouchable as he seemed. He'd been under quiet investigation by federal authorities for months. Rebecca likely had no idea she'd tethered herself to a sinking ship. When Ethan told me this, a dark grin spread across my face. I wasn't just going to fight back, I was going to let them destroy each other. The first move was subtle. I reached out to an attorney I trusted, someone Rebecca didn't know. Together, we quietly froze our joint accounts. The divorce papers she'd smugly delivered were useless now, she'd have to renegotiate everything. She didn't notice right away, of course, but I knew the moment she did, it would send her scrambling. Next, I began gathering every shred of evidence I had against her. The photos, the receipts, Ethan's findings, everything went into a carefully curated file. I wasn't sure how I'd use it yet, but having the leverage felt like holding a loaded gun. Then, I made my boldest move yet. I reached out to the authorities investigating Victor Hale. At first, they were hesitant to take me seriously, just another scorned husband with a grudge. But when I laid out what I had, their tone shifted. They were particularly interested in Rebecca's involvement, especially her name on the contracts. It seemed Victor had been using her not just as a partner but as a shield. Her clean record provided cover for his dirty deals. I didn't tell them everything, though. Not yet. I wanted to see how far Rebecca would go before she realized she was walking straight into a trap. The first crack came a week later. Rebecca called me, her tone clipped and irritated. "Alex," she snapped, "why are the accounts frozen? I have expenses to handle, and this is just petty." I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. "Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing. Why are you moving money into shell companies tied to Victor Hale?" The silence on the other end was deafening. I could almost hear her calculating her response. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally said, but her voice wavered. "Sure you don't," I replied smoothly. "Here's the thing, Rebecca, you may have fooled me for 20 years, but you're not as smart as you think. You left a trail. And I'm not the only one who's noticed." "What are you saying?" she hissed, her composure slipping. "I'm saying you've got bigger problems than me. But don't worry, I'm happy to watch you figure that out." I hung up before she could respond, my heart racing with satisfaction. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was in control. But the real payoff came the next morning. I woke to a frantic voicemail from Rebecca. "Alex, we need to talk. Now. Please, this is serious. Call me back." Her voice was shaky, panicked. I didn't call her back. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to Ethan with a simple message: "It's starting." Rebecca thought she'd destroyed me. Now, she was learning what it felt like to lose everything, and I was just getting started. Rebecca's panic was palpable, and for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. Her cool, calculated demeanor was cracking, and I could tell she was losing control of the game she thought she was winning. Her frantic voicemail was followed by a barrage of texts, each more desperate than the last. "Alex, pick up. This isn't funny. Call me back now. You don't understand what's at stake. You're making a huge mistake." I understood perfectly. She was in trouble, and that meant I was finally getting somewhere. I ignored every single message, letting her stew in her own chaos. If she wanted to manipulate me into giving her what she wanted, she was going to be sorely disappointed. But the real breakthrough came that evening when I got a call, not from Rebecca, but from Victor Hale himself. I stared at my phone, his name lighting up the screen, and for a moment, I debated letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity got the better of me. I answered, keeping my voice calm. "Victor Hale. To what do I owe the pleasure?" His voice was smooth, confident, but there was a tension beneath it that told me he wasn't calling just for a friendly chat. "Alex, let's not play games. I think you know why I'm calling." "Enlighten me," I said, leaning back in my chair. There was a pause, then he said, "You've been meddling in things you don't understand. Freezing accounts, digging into my business, it's a bad look, my friend." "I'm not your friend," I replied coldly. "And if you think I don't understand what's going on, then you're even more arrogant than I thought." "Careful, Alex," Victor said, his tone dropping an octave. "You don't want to make an enemy of me." I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing to you. You and Rebecca thought you could use me, take everything I've built, and leave me in the dirt. But you underestimated me." There was a long silence on the other end, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. Then, he sighed. "Look, I'm willing to be reasonable. Let's meet. We can work this out like adults." "Reasonable?" I scoffed. "You think I'd trust a snake like you? I've already given what I have to the authorities, Victor. How's that for reasonable?" I wasn't bluffing, and he knew it. His silence confirmed as much. "You're making a mistake," he said finally, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "When this blows up, you'll regret it." "Funny," I said, my tone icy. "That's exactly what I was thinking about you." I hung up, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a bold move, but I wasn't about to let Victor intimidate me. He'd called me to try and strong-arm me into backing down, but all he'd done was confirm I was hitting a nerve. The next few days were a whirlwind. Ethan kept feeding me updates, and the net around Victor and Rebecca tightened. The feds were moving faster than I'd expected, likely spurred on by the evidence I'd handed over. Meanwhile, Rebecca's texts took a new tone, less demanding, more pleading. "Alex, we need to talk. I'm in over my head. Please, just call me. I don't know what to do." It was almost pathetic. Almost. Then, 2 nights later, something happened that changed everything. I was sitting in my office, going over some paperwork, when my phone buzzed with a notification from my security cameras. Someone was outside the house. I pulled up the live feed and froze. It was Rebecca, pacing back and forth on the porch, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen her. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, and she kept glancing over her shoulder like she was being followed. I debated ignoring her, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door, leaning against the frame as she turned to face me. "Alex," she said, her voice shaky. I didn't know where else to go. Her words hit me like a gut punch. This was the woman who had torn my life apart, the woman who had smirked while calling me a stepping stone. And now she was standing on my doorstep, begging for help. The tables had turned. I crossed my arms, keeping my expression neutral. "What do you want, Rebecca?" "I'm in trouble," she said, her voice breaking. "Victor, he's not who I thought he was. He's dangerous, Alex. I don't know what to do." I stared at her, letting her words sink in. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. But then I remembered the smirk, the betrayal, and the hell she'd put me through. "Why should I care?" I asked, my tone as cold as the night air. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't trust them. Rebecca had always been good at playing the victim when it suited her. "Because if you don't, he'll destroy me," she whispered. I tilted my head, pretending to think. "Sounds like a personal problem." Her face crumbled, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She wasn't just panicking, she was terrified. "I made a mistake," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Please, Alex. I don't have anyone else to turn to." I stared at her for a long moment, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, to let her deal with the consequences of her choices. But another part of me, call it curiosity, call it strategy, wanted to hear what she had to say. "Fine," I said finally, stepping aside. "Talk." She hesitated for a moment, then walked inside, the door closing behind her. And as she sat down, the words that came next changed everything. Rebecca sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling as she clasped them tightly in her lap. For a woman who had once exuded unshakable confidence, she now looked utterly broken. But I wasn't about to let that fool me. Not after everything she'd done. "Well," I said, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "You've got my attention. Start talking." She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the window as if expecting Victor himself to come storming in. He's not who he seems, Alex," she began, her voice shaky. "Victor, he's ruthless. I thought I could handle it, thought I could keep up with his world, but I was wrong." I raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "And I'm supposed to feel sorry for you? You left me for that world, Rebecca. You tore me down for him. So why don't you explain why I should care?" Her head dropped, and for a moment, I thought she might actually cry. "Because he's turning on me. On everyone," she said quietly. "I'm just collateral damage to him now." "Welcome to the club," I said coldly. "Get to the point." She flinched at the venom in my voice but continued. "Those deals we worked on, the land developments, the investments, they weren't legitimate. Victor's been laundering money through them, and now the feds are closing in. He's tying up loose ends." Her words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Loose ends. That's what she was to him now. That's what she'd made me to her back then. "You're saying Victor's cleaning house," I said, my voice flat. "And you're worried you're next?" She nodded, her eyes wide with desperation. "He's already threatened me. He said if I don't disappear quietly, he'll bury me in the fallout. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. You think this is funny? She snapped, her voice breaking with frustration. Funny? No, I said, shaking my head. I think it's poetic justice. You sold me out for a man who's now selling you out. Seems fitting. Damn it, Alex, she shouted, standing abruptly. I know I made mistakes, okay? But I didn't deserve this. I didn't know he was a monster. Didn't know. I repeated, my voice rising. You knew exactly who he was, Rebecca. You didn't care, as long as you got what you wanted. She opened her mouth to respond but then closed it, her shoulders slumping. She knew I was right, and the realization seemed to crush her. I don't have anyone else, she whispered. You're the only one who can help me. The audacity of her words almost made me laugh again. Help you? I said, stepping closer. Why in the world would I do that? You've burned every bridge between us, Rebecca. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the coffee table between us. Because I can help you too. Curiosity flickered in my chest, but I didn't show it. What's that? Everything I have on Victor, she said, her voice steady now, her desperation shifting into determination. Contracts, deals, offshore accounts. Enough to make sure he goes down. I stared at the folder for a long moment. This was it, the leverage I'd been missing. If what she said was true, it could be the final nail in Victor Hale's coffin. But working with Rebecca? After everything? And what do you get out of this? I asked, narrowing my eyes. I just want out, she said, her voice trembling again. I need protection, Alex. I need to disappear before he comes for me. It was almost laughable. The woman who had once sneered at me, who had called me a stepping stone, was now begging for my help to escape the mess she'd created. And yet, as much as I wanted to slam the door on her and her problems, I couldn't ignore the opportunity she'd just handed me. I picked up the folder, flipping through the documents. She wasn't lying. This was gold. Bank statements, emails, even a recording of Victor threatening her during a phone call. The evidence was airtight. I'll think about it, I said, snapping the folder shut. Alex, please, she pleaded, stepping closer. I'm running out of time. If you don't help me. Then what? I cut her off. Victor will do to you what you were perfectly fine with him doing to me. Her face fell, and for the first time, I saw genuine regret in her eyes. I didn't want it to go this far, she whispered. But it did, I said firmly. And now you have to live with that. Rebecca's shoulders sagged as she realized she had no more cards to play. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. Wait, I called out, stopping her. She froze, looking back at me with a glimmer of hope. If I help you, I said slowly, this isn't about forgiveness. This is about taking Victor down. Nothing more. She nodded quickly, desperation flashing across her face. I understand. Good, I said, holding up the folder. Because if you try to double-cross me again, Rebecca, I won't just let Victor handle you. I'll make sure you regret it myself. She swallowed hard, then nodded again. Deal. As the door closed behind her, I sat back on the couch, staring at the folder in my hands. I didn't trust her, not for a second. But one thing was clear, this was my chance to finish what she and Victor had started, and to end it on my terms. The wheels were in motion. Rebecca's betrayal had set the stage, but now I was directing the play. The folder she left behind was a goldmine, more than I had dared hope for. It wasn't just damning evidence against Victor, it was a roadmap to his empire. Offshore accounts, fraudulent contracts, and names of accomplices. Every piece of dirt she'd collected during her time by his side was now in my hands. But I didn't trust her, not for a second. She claimed she wanted to take Victor down, but this was still Rebecca. The same woman who had looked me in the eyes and called me a stepping stone. I needed to stay 2 steps ahead, just in case she decided to switch sides again. I called Ethan and filled him in. This changes everything, he said, his voice practically buzzing with excitement. If this evidence holds up, we can sink Victor for good. That's the plan, I said. But we need to be smart. Rebecca's desperate, and desperate people make reckless moves. I'll dig into everything, Ethan promised. And Alex? Be careful. If Victor catches wind of this, he won't just come after Rebecca. He'll come after you. That was a risk I was willing to take. I'd already spent months clawing my way back from the ashes Rebecca had left me in. I wasn't about to back down now. The first step was to secure the evidence. Ethan helped me encrypt the files and create multiple backups, each stored in a different location. If Victor tried to erase the trail, he'd have to take down half the internet to do it. Next, I reached out to the federal investigators who'd been circling Victor for months. When I presented them with the new evidence, their skepticism turned to sharp interest. "This is exactly what we needed," one of them said, flipping through the folder. "With this, we can move in fast." But fast wasn't enough for me. I wanted Victor to feel the walls closing in, to know he was losing control before the final blow landed. And I wanted Rebecca to see just how far I was willing to go to make sure neither of them walked away unscathed. 2 days later, the first domino fell. A news report broke about Victor Hale's questionable business practices. It was vague, a teaser more than anything, but it was enough to rattle him. Rebecca called me that evening, her voice tight with panic. "Alex, what did you do?" she demanded. "Just giving him a taste of what's coming," I said calmly. "Don't tell me you're having second thoughts." "No, but," she hesitated. "Victor's been calling me non-stop. He knows something's wrong. He's starting to suspect." "Good," I said. "Let him sweat." "But what if he—" "Rebecca," I interrupted, my tone sharp. "You came to me for help. This is how it works. You don't get to question my methods." She fell silent, and I could almost hear her grinding her teeth on the other end of the line. "Fine," she said finally. "But you better make sure he goes down." I can't go back to that." I hung up without responding. Her fear was useful, but I wasn't about to let her dictate the terms. By the end of the week, Victor's empire was unraveling. Bank accounts were frozen, business partners were distancing themselves, and the media was circling like vultures. But Victor wasn't the kind of man to go down quietly. Late one night, I was reviewing the latest reports Ethan had sent me when my phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. "Alex," Victor's voice came through, cold and sharp. "You've been busy." I didn't respond, waiting for him to make the next move. "You think you're smart, don't you?" he continued. "Dragging my name through the mud, turning Rebecca against me. But you're playing a dangerous game." "You're right," I said, my voice steady. "It is dangerous, for you." His laugh was low and menacing. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. I built this empire, and you think you can tear it down with a few pieces of paper. It's already crumbling," I shot back. "And when it falls, I'll be the one standing." Victor's tone shifted, colder than before. "You think this is over? You're nothing, Alex. A nobody. I've destroyed men far more powerful than you. And yet, here you are," I said, smirking. "Calling me in the middle of the night, desperate to make me stop. Sounds like you're the one who's afraid." The line went silent for a moment, then Victor spoke again, his voice low and dangerous. "Enjoy this while it lasts. Because when I'm done with you, there won't be anything left." He hung up, and I stared at the phone, my heart pounding. Victor was cornered, and that made him dangerous. But it also meant I was winning. The next day, the feds moved in. Victor Hale was arrested during a high-profile raid, his assets seized, and his face plastered across every major news outlet. The media frenzy was relentless, painting him as the mastermind behind one of the largest financial frauds in recent history. But the victory wasn't as sweet as I'd hoped. Rebecca's role in all of this wasn't public, yet. The feds were still deciding how to handle her, and she was walking a tightrope, hoping they'd let her off easy in exchange for her cooperation. She called me again that night, her voice trembling. "It's done, isn't it? He's really going down." "It's done," I confirmed. She exhaled sharply, the relief in her voice unmistakable. "Thank you, Alex. I know you didn't have to help me." I stayed silent, my mind racing. Rebecca might think this was over, but I wasn't finished. Not yet. She'd betrayed me, humiliated me, and turned my life upside down. Victor might be gone, but there was still one loose end I needed to tie up. And Rebecca wasn't going to see it coming. The fallout from Victor Hale's arrest was swift and brutal. His empire crumbled, his name dragged through the mud, and his former allies scattered like rats from a sinking ship. Watching it unfold felt like a long-awaited vindication. But my victory wasn't complete, not yet. Rebecca had gone quiet after our last conversation. She was likely hiding, hoping to avoid any further scrutiny from the authorities. But I wasn't about to let her fade into the background without facing the consequences of her betrayal. She had used me, humiliated me, and gambled with everything I'd built. Now, it was her turn to pay the price. I spent days preparing my final move. The folder she'd given me contained more than enough evidence to implicate her in Victor's schemes. While she might have been a pawn in his game, she wasn't innocent. She'd signed the contracts, attended the meetings, and reaped the rewards of their partnership. And I made sure the authorities knew it. The phone call came late one evening. It was Rebecca. Her voice was strained, panicked. "Alex," she began, but I cut her off. "I've been expecting your call," I said calmly. They've subpoenaed me," she stammered. "The feds want me to testify. They're saying I could be charged as an accomplice." "That's unfortunate," I said, my tone devoid of sympathy. "You did this," she hissed, her composure cracking. "You turned them against me." I laughed coldly. "Don't give me so much credit, Rebecca. You did this to yourself. I just gave them the truth." "You can fix this," she said, her voice desperate. "You have connections now. You can tell them I was just a pawn, that I didn't know what Victor was doing." "Why would I do that?" I asked, my voice sharp. "You think I've forgotten what you did to me? The lies, the manipulation, the way you threw me away like I was nothing." Her silence was deafening. "Rebecca," I continued, my tone steady and unyielding, "this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about justice. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'll lose everything." I paused, letting her words hang in the air. "Everything? You mean like I did? When you destroyed my life and left me with nothing?" "Alex. You don't get to beg for mercy now," I interrupted. "Not after everything you've done. This is the end of the line, Rebecca. You wanted to climb higher, to live in Victor's world. Well, now you get to face the consequences of that decision." She sobbed, the sound hollow and pathetic. But I didn't flinch. Her tears were a cheap ploy, one I'd fallen for too many times before. "I hope you find peace with what's left of your life," I said, my voice cold and final. "But don't call me again. We're done." I hung up, the weight of 20 years lifting from my shoulders. The next morning, the news broke. Rebecca had been named as a cooperating witness in Victor Hale's case, agreeing to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her face was splashed across the headlines, her reputation in tatters. The life she had built on lies and manipulation was over. For the first time in months, I felt free. She had begged for my help, and I had given her exactly what she deserved, accountability. She was no longer my burden to bear. As I stood on my porch, the crisp morning air filling my lungs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. Rebecca had underestimated me, just as Victor had. They had both thought they could use me and walk away unscathed. But they were wrong. This was my life, and I had taken it back. On my terms. And for the first time in years, I was ready to move forward, leaving them, and their chaos, behind.